great to be here. First thing I'd say is I know less about cardiology than all of you have forgotten. I'm not qualified to be speaking on cardiology, but I've spent most of my life in technology innovation, and that part of it I think I understand fairly well. As I've looked at medicine, it's an exciting area, but the changes we are likely to see are larger than I think most people anticipate. Let me touch on a few of those without much explanation, and hopefully it'll cause some questions to be raised. The first thing I think we will find is the rate of innovation will change from 10 to 15-year cycles, which are common in medicine for a major change, to 2 to 3 year cycles. If you look at it that way, we'll see more change in the next 15 years than in the last 50 in the practice of medicine. There's a few things we have to do that are different. The first, and I think this will be very, very important, is to get rid of the notion that humans have to look at data. So we see all this data being generated and people objecting that there's too much data and we should get rid of the idea. You know, it is unfortunate most of medicine today is based on things humans could measure a long, long time ago. Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, those are the first things your primary care physician uses. We've stuck with that notion. A single blood test, if you do it right, should generate hundreds, if not thousands, of data points. I know one company that generates 300,000 biomarkers out of each blood sample. You get rid of the notion that humans need to look at this. That's important. The other second thing to remember in technology evolution is the first or second generation are always clumsy. So what you're starting to see in digital health, you ought to imagine looks and feels like my first cell phone did, which Gen 1 of the mobile cell phone was actually looked more like a sewing machine that I actually mounted on the passenger side of my car. But by Gen 7, it was the iPhone. And there was a new generation literally every 2 to 3 years. So when you see clumsy systems, think of that 3-year-old toddler, not the 35-year-old athlete. But that 3-year-old toddler that you see today will become, so keep that analogy, whether it's Gen 1 of the cell phone to Gen 7 or a 3-year-old toddler. If we do the right things, and though medicine's come a long way, and if you imagine medicine today versus 50 years, you can't compare, it's so much better. It is still today the practice of medicine. We do the same things that we learned out of practice. I think we are on the verge of taking the practice of medicine to the science of medicine, where there will be optimal decisions. I always complain that every health system has a different set of guidelines or care paths. It can't mathematically write that each is different or needs to be different. There is only one right option for any given patient. So those kinds of things will become much more scientific and science than practice. I think we will generate a lot more data, and I think we'll see a lot less data. I love my little Apple Watch with my AliveCor band. The average person using AliveCor is taking 20 ECGs a month today. That's the average patient who's using it. Now, no doctor wants to see 20 ECGs, but if there's significant shifts in trends, you want to see that. In fact, the best part I like, which is not released and you haven't heard about it, is my Apple Watch, very inaccurate with respect to heart rate and all, actually can tell me when I might be having an AFib episode. And it doesn't tell me I have an AFib episode. It texts me to say, please take your ECG. That's a very safe way to introduce lots of data into something like this. So you'll see that kind of thing. Another piece of research I saw just blew my mind. So imagine the patient taking 20 ECGs, and that'll go higher if the watch tells you when you should take your ECG. From your ECG on a device like the AliveCor, you can tell your blood potassium levels. All of you know more better than me how important that might be, but now you've taken, at zero cost, tens of blood potassium readings for a patient. And you want to take them when the patient's not feeling well. You know, it's sort of silly. If I need to get an ECG, I call my cardiologist. He says, schedule an appointment. It may be a week later. You want the ECG when the patient's not feeling well. In fact, you want it when he wakes up, when he's exercising, when he's going to bed, anytime you can. And it's as simple as doing something like this. Like literally, I can take an ECG in a meeting without anybody knowing I'm taking an ECG. And only have a consequence when something. So imagine the world very differently and data use very differently. There's other simultaneous measures. We know depression is a comorbidity in cardiac patients. A company like Ginger.io, just passively from your cell phone, can detect mental health episodes, your mental state. It can detect the beginnings of a depression episode better than a typical psychiatrist can. And you have it 24/7. So you could start to measure other things with it. And that's all really, really right. When I look at a typical hospital bed, there's all these monitors going on. Very little cross-correlation across them. Some of the stuff I've seen out of places, there was a project at Baylor that actually says across those you can predict most adverse events. So now whether it's 24/7 monitoring at home with a simple device like this, or in the hospital bed, you're getting a lot more information out of the same data, and it's information. I've seen stuff that auto-guides a non-cardiac echogram, guides you to an echocardiogram without needing a technician who understands ultrasound, and an interpretation of the image without needing somebody to interpret an echocardiogram. So these are all really, really exciting possibilities. The best stuff I've seen says you can predict cardiac events 4 to 6 hours in advance. All that starts to be very exciting. Now suddenly you're taking very expensive episodes and doing something about them before they become expensive. There's another avenue that's equally important. If you look at all the articles in cardiology, and I suspect nobody here has kept up with all of them, all that knowledge will be captured in a system that you can do Q&A with. And if you're a cardiologist, it may talk to you in medical language, and if you're a patient, it might talk to you in normal English. That then empowers patients in a way you couldn't imagine. It makes the cardiologist's job both easier if they're responsive and very hard if they're not, because patients have a lot more access to information. I suspect within 5 to 10 years, all of cardiology knowledge and most of medicine will be captured in a system where you can ask any question and get a response back at your level of understanding. That'll be exciting and scary. There'll be new tools, just like I mentioned, measuring potassium in the blood non-invasively. HRV is a very underutilized tool. It's got to be used a lot more, and we'll be surprised. I was talking to Eric Topol, and he wants to embed sensors that measure troponin. I said, what if you could do it without embedding a sensor? If you can measure potassium, is it possible? And I don't know the answer to that. Can you measure troponin? These are all really exciting possibilities. I don't want to take too much longer, except to say one or two final things. There is no question that two things will happen. Machine intelligence will be much more integrative of patient care than any human being could possibly provide. If you have a cardiology problem and a diabetes problem and an osteoporosis problem, integrating across all those specialties, the most important person may become your primary care physician, because they will have all those specialty tools available to them, and they'll be the integrator. So I'm speculating the primary care physician in 10 or 15 years will be way more important than the specialist, which may or may not be good news to this audience, but I think it's likely. The way I describe it is, if you're a biology student with the benefit of a Google search engine by your side, you know a lot more than any biology professor by themselves. Think about it. So integrative medicine will come from there. It is scary how fast some of these technologies are moving. They may be slowed down by the FDA. There's a huge speculative element there. They may be slowed down by how people get presented with this. Is it data? It'll be very confusing. Nobody will want to adapt it. If it's presented the right way, and when you look at a company like Twitter and Facebook, the one thing they're awesome at is getting patient engagement. In their case, consumer engagement. They can addict you to a new technology that you never imagined you needed almost instantaneously. Suddenly, there's 1 billion people doing Snapchat. That happens in a few years. No traditional system ever achieved that. And the reason they do it, something like Twitter iterates their design every week. And a 0.01% optimization every week adds up to a lot over years. So engagement will change very dramatically. You will never be able to do it with a system like Epic that takes 5 years to change anything. By the way, Epic's a fun system. When I was 21, I coded in the language Epic is coded in. Now, I haven't met a programmer here who knows what that language is. I built a hospital information system for a hospital out of Pittsburgh. So let me stop there. I think I've raised probably enough questions.
So thank you very much.